Maybe we can enable everyone to on the chat, please. Oh, we already have.
Yep, people are enabled.
Oh, Peru,
Excellent.
Massachusetts, North Carolina. It's great to see you. Well,
Wonderful.
virtually see you all.
So hello, everyone from all over the world. We have people from Lima, Massachusetts, North Carolina. Hi, Dave from Massachusetts. Dark Ridge Observatory. Hi, Tom. Ontario. Let's see, California. Hi, Molly. Hi, Molly. Good to see you. Florida, Maryland, Wisconsin, Ohio, San Diego, all over the US. We're also having, hi Pierre from Belgium, Germany, Mumbai. Let's see. Greece, hi George. Καλησπέρα στην Ελλάδα μας και στην Κύπρο. France, yeah, that was Greek for you. I was really Greek. Hi Mike, hi Texas.
How's it going?
Hi Ed.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. We have full house. Hi, Slovakia, Vermont, the UK, France. Oh, hello, everyone from all over the world. So what? Oh, hello, Abu Dhabi. What time is it there? So wonderful you could join us. Oh, this is so cool. Hello, Finland. 11:33 p.m. Oh my goodness, we're having tea together. Hello, Ukraine.
I think we should start having a competition for the person who shows up with the absolute worst time at like 3 in the morning.
We have people who've been joining us from Australia and Taiwan and India, where it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and absolutely loving the community that these webinars and how-to hours are building around the AAVSO. So we're here together, learning, ready to learn. Wonderful. We have 5 more minutes, so let's see more people coming. Hello, Poland. Greetings.
And so the award for the person showing up at 3 in the morning should be some coffee that we send them.
Or tea.
Or tea. Some caffeinated beverages.
Some caffeinated beverage, yes. But I suspect that where they come from, they have very high standards and much, much better quality that I can find here.
I know, so, I know.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Japan, New Zealand.
I'm starting to get nervous.
No need.
No, this is...
You're just talking to your friends.
Yes, absolutely. See, when I was saying that, you know, we're all geeking out together, this is what I meant. It's just like we're all together here. It's awesome. It is awesome. Hi, Finland. Good to see you again. Gordon, yes, virtual coffee. What time is it in California? Do I know how to count across time zones? Oh, it's about lunchtime. Okay. Hello, Austria. Really good to see you, Thomas. Hello, Ireland. Oh, bucket list. I have to visit Ireland. Yes, our heart goes out to the Philippines. I hope that people recover. Hello, Tanzania. Maui, aloha. Hello, France. Hello, Canada. How are you guys doing up there? Hello, Slovenia. Cool. So we are at more than 130 participants at this point. Cool. And 5 more minutes to go. Yeah, Kim, cold temperatures, soon to be strong winds. We're getting some of these lovely Canadian weather down here as well, but I don't envy you. Hello, Spain. Wonderful. All righty, a couple more minutes to go. Hi, Eileen. Who's my neighbor? I hope to be able to join you for lunch at some point post-coronavirus. 2021 can't come early enough, soon enough. Hello, Venezuela. Hello, Utah. Hi, Josh. Good to see you from Belgium. Rhode Island, Florida. How wonderful to see you all. Let's give a couple of minutes. We are at 163 participants right now. This is a virtual party, if you think about it. We can't have it in person, so let's have it over Zoom. Arizona. Is that?
So if you would have told me it was a party, I would have started getting music.
Oh dear, no, we've debated the music part for a long time, including singing.
Oh, you definitely don't want me singing.
Same here. You don't want me singing. So we do have talent at the AAVSO, though. So I'm trying to convince my colleagues among staff whether they would sing at some point.
AAVSO karaoke.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. As long as I don't participate, it's going to be a success. All right. So we are at our designated hours. Yeah, please, no background music. We're not going to have any background music, my friends. So again, welcome to everyone to our how-to hour. This is a time dedicated to all of you, all of us, to connect, relax, have fun, and learn something new. With that, I would like to acknowledge again our sponsors who have made this meeting and this how-to hour possible. OPSTEC, QHY CCD cameras, optical structures, First Light and Night Telescope. And I'd like to just add a couple of logistics. At the very bottom of your screen, you should be able to see 2 different buttons that are important. The first one is the chat, what you're using right now to introduce yourself and let us know where you're from. That is going to be disabled during this discussion. And the second one is the Q&A. Q&A enables you to ask questions from our speakers. You can ask at any time during the presentations. The way that we're going to run the go-to hour is that we're going to allow the first speaker introduce his subject, and then he's going to address questions. And then the second speakers will discuss their subjects, and then we're going to address questions. Also reminding you that there is a little button at the very bottom of your screen that has a little microphone. This is a drop-down menu that has your sound settings. If you lose sound at any point, then you should be able to fix it through that. And that is for our Zoom registrants, our Zoom participants. A reminder, we are actually broadcasting live on YouTube. So hello to everyone who's joining us from there. And with that, I would like to introduce Ken Menzies, who is going to introduce the webinar, the how-to hour for today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Ken, it's all yours.
Now I will share my screen and start my PowerPoint and go to slide view. Welcome to all, last time I looked, 169 of you across our wonderful world. This is in fact the fourth how-to hour. It's technically 3.5, but who's counting? And over the past 11 years, I've attended all of the meetings the AAVSO has had, and I've constantly reminded myself that I think the thing that most of us would like to know are some new skills, some new ideas, some new methods and procedures, and that's where the how-to hour was designed to do. Today, we have two speakers. The first one is Greg Sivikoff from the University of Alberta in Canada. And he's a professor, so I'm sure he stands in front of his students many days of the week, trying to keep them focused. And I asked him 2 years ago now, I believe, Greg, to give a talk on effectively how to give a talk. Because as we've all seen, we've been to many presentations, especially if we're at the back of the hall, that we can barely see, and we can hardly hear the speaker at times. So Greg is going to give us some ideas on how to improve our presentations. The second part of the presentations today are related to photometric accuracy, and that's really related to how good are my data? It's probably the most common question, one of the most common questions I'm asked. How do I get good data? And is my data good enough? I'm a chemist, Ed's a biologist, so we've measured things for most of our careers. In this case, we're going to try to specify things related to photometry. But again, with the idea of helping you identify how good your data is. One additional thing, there will be a post survey after the presentation today, and there will be a link, and I think Lindsay will be able to help us with that at the end, but you should be able to find that. And hopefully you'll respond so that we get some ideas for the future. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Greg, you should be able to take over and share your screen.
All right. Well, it is an absolute pleasure today to talk to you and give what I believe is a bias guide on how to give science talks. Just to confirm, can people see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. So in this picture right here, I'm showing an astrophysicist giving an absolutely excellent TED Talk. I am not going to try to turn you all into people that live the TED mantra of how to give talks, but I am going to try to give what is my bias guide on how to give at least better scientific talks. I have some minor training in science communication, but as Ken basically mentioned, a lot of this comes from my own expertise, both in the classroom, but also in trying to communicate through outreach in astronomy. And I have to say that communication is the skill I think is most critical that I train my students in. Not the astronomy itself, but the communication. Before I actually do the talk, I'd like to at least mention the fact that many of us that do astronomy at places that are on lands that were originally held by different indigenous communities. Right now in Edmonton, Alberta, which is Amaskwaci Waska Akian, and I apologize if I mispronounced that. This is part of what's called Treaty 6 territory in Canada, and this was a traditional gathering place for many, many different diverse Indigenous peoples. And I like to actually think about the fact that we are now doing our meetings virtually, and so we're all sort of experiencing this type of the type of diverse meetings that used to occur around the world. So I'm going to focus on 3 basic aspects to how to give a better science talk. If there's one thing that the #1 rule I would say to being a good storyteller, it's going to be that being on time is so much better than being over time. And not only does it just mean that you have to plan for your talk. So for instance, yesterday's talks were supposed to be 12-minute talks followed by 3 minutes of questions. But you also have to basically plan for the fact that you may be interrupted and you may need to build a minute or 2 into your actual plan. I failed yesterday. I actually wound up going, I think, 17 minutes before we could get to questions. So we can all always improve. So it's important to note that even though I'm going to give you advice, even I don't live up to my own advice. It's aspirational. We want to be better. Now, the next big piece of advice in terms of being a good storyteller is that what you're doing is you are giving a narrative. I view that every way we communicate has to do with narratives. Whether I'm writing a paper, writing a senator, writing a newspaper, you name it, I'm telling a story to different people. And when I tell this story, absolutely everything you say, everything you do, and everything you show should be working towards the end of that story. You really need to avoid tangents. And I like to think to that famous scene in Emperor Strikes Back, which I won't give away in case one of you out there hasn't seen it. But almost everything in the first 2 series of interactions between the 2 characters on the screen builds to this moment in what I think is one of the most iconic scenes in all of storytelling and cinema. But I'm biased because I'm a sci-fi geek. Another very important part about being a good storyteller is that you really have to know your audience. And different audiences require different approaches. In this picture here, I'm showing a snapshot from the Blues Brothers movie. The Blues Brothers are a blues band, and they wind up in this scene at a country and western bar. And let's just say that their initial foray into blues music is met with lots of resistance and thrown items. Well, realizing that they're not connecting with the audience, they transition to what is the best version of the song Rawhide you'll ever hear and end to thunderous applause. So always know your audience and be flexible to change to that audience. In order to be a good storyteller, you need to actually be a good planner. And when it comes to planning, I like to use the storyboarding technique. And for the storyboarding technique, I often, in olden days, would begin on index cards. Nowadays, I sort of write things out on blank PowerPoint screens. But the idea of a storyboard is you want to distill your entire talk into just a few major points. So for instance, in this storyboard, the person is trying to communicate the different traditional aspects of a Greek drama and how they apply to Shakespeare's Macbeth. So they basically distill their entire thesis, their narrative, down into these 6 slides, 6 storyboards. It may be that the talk they give is 6 slides. It may be that the talk they give is 60 slides. But this is the very basis, and this is how you begin to plan your talk. Another very critical aspect is you really need to engage your audience as early as you can. Audiences need to connect with the speaker, need to connect with the narrative. So I like to think about the Arabian Nights, a story in which you find, I believe the princess's name is, or the protagonist's name is Scheherazade, basically being forced to tell stories 1 per night to keep the vizier, the person in charge, entertained, or else she may be executed in the morning. This creates a narrative within a narrative that actually works to very much get you into the story. And it's a great way of thinking about different ways in which you can frame your talk. Get people in early as possible. One of the things that scientists often do, because we like to think very analytically, is we often have a slide called overview. I'm going to advocate about losing that slide. If your talk is small, lose the slide completely. You don't have time. If your talk is longer, you can have a overview slide. Just don't call it overview. Engage your audience in a different way. What I'm going to tell you today, the key aspects of this talk. Don't give people just the robotic outline of your talk. Perhaps one of the things I run into the most when I listen to talks is that people forget that they are likely the only true expert in the room giving on the subject for the talk they're giving. That means that you have to take time to teach your audience everything that you need to think that's important without being condescending. And you have to do this while basically either avoiding or what I call unpacking jargon. So if you talk about a cataclysmic variable, you have to explain that it's a white dwarf that is accreting from a star. But if you talk about a white dwarf and accretion, you may have to explain those topics. So you have to think down to the level of your audience, what they understand, and get rid of jargon as much as possible. I think Bruce Lee, when he created his version of martial arts, very much took existing martial arts and distilled them down, essentially unpacked the jargon of the martial arts into his new style. Sorry. And when you're going to be the storyteller, you've unpacked the jargon. This goes in the slight opposite way, that telling less of your story is actually much more. Don't be like Mickey trying to overstuff your suitcase. Don't be like me yesterday trying to overfill your stuff case. The reason why my talk went 17 minutes was because two things. One, I tried to put too much into it. Two, I didn't practice enough to know that I was trying to put too much into it. Overall, I tend to have this idea of KISS. Keep it simple, speaker. What that means is that when you're talking on any given talk, you want to minimize the number of key points. If I'm giving a 12 or 15-minute talk, I probably can only get 2 key points across, and that's being generous. If I'm giving a 15-minute talk, I might be able to get 3 to 5 key points across, but really 3 to 4 is much better. And so you have to very much winnow down your story. I was told in a science communication course that this is known as killing your babies, in the sense that their baby is something you care about deeply, and it's very hard, something you would never want to do. But in communication is actually aspect to get down to the critical thing that you're trying to communicate. But this doesn't just apply on your talks. This applies on each and every slide. And so I suggest you always want to minimize the text that you have in a slide, and you want to maximize the images you have in the slides. As a matter of fact, in the talk I'm giving you, I feel that I have too much text and too little images. But because of what I'm doing in terms of how this may go up on YouTube, I'm understanding that some people may not be able to follow this in the same ways. So for instance, I sometimes will violate this rule with quotes or acknowledgements in particular, like the acknowledgement I did at the beginning of this talk. When I do this, this is done on purpose, and I am choosing to break a rule, but I'm doing it very consciously. It may not always be the best choice, but at least you're making the decision to violate the rule as opposed to accidentally doing it. Overall, you're building your slides up to that end story. So every slide, everything you say should act to support each other, and you should be working to not duplicate information. That doesn't mean you can't put the same image up, but it does mean that you should be thinking about the transition from the past topic to the image you talked about again, and probably using it as a shift to a new topic. That also means that when you're creating your storyboard, when you're creating your slides, if you ever find yourself trying to go backwards to get an image, to get a point, don't go backwards, copy that slide and make it your next slide in your talk. All right, so we've learned to be a good storyteller. Now comes what many people think is the hard part, and that's developing stage presence. I can tell you that the word is developing here because I think very few of us are born with the innate charisma to just present. I am actually a fairly introspective person, and it wasn't until I was a postdoc that I began to develop my own stage presence. And before, I wasn't a bad speaker, but boy, I was not a good speaker. One of the first things you need to do is you need to know what you want to say, and you want to not read that from slides. So that means practice, practice, practice. Remember, one of the reasons why I was late over time yesterday was because I didn't practice enough. But you also want to be careful about practicing too much. You don't actually want to become robotic. So one of the things that I think is important is to try to at least record yourself once or twice in your lifetime and see how you're giving your talk. Ask yourself critically, am I coming across like the person I am, or am I coming across more robotic? And if so, why? It's a question you have to ask yourself. It's different for many people. For my own experience, it was because I was a perfectionist and I used to memorize my talk word for word. But that left me very little capacity to actually inject emotion. Speaking of emotion, you are confident people when you're speaking. You chose to speak about a topic, and so you are authentically confident. This is your passion. So I want you to be like this wonderful young girl in this picture. Imagine yourself as a superhero giving the talk, because you are that superhero. I know it can be very easy to get anxious about what's going on, but trust me, you are in a better situation than you probably think you are. So that means that if you are a person who suffers from anxiety or nervousness, you're going to have to learn to not panic. You're going to have to learn to accept your anxiety. It's not to say that you can't panic, but it's to say to at least, if I am panicking, understand it, accept it. The other thing to realize is that unless you're being paid $500 to give a talk, and trust me, I don't get paid $500 to give a talk, your audience isn't expecting perfection. Your audience is probably identifying with you. When they see you being nervous, they're not going, oh, no, that person's nervous. They're probably saying, oh, I feel for that person. I can see that they're nervous. So it's actually okay to be anxious. It's okay to be nervous. Like I said, I suffer from anxiety, yet I've found that public speaking is one of the few places where I can get over many of my anxieties. Now, part of this process, and this is the hard one, is that you have to practice increasing your flexibility. Just like the Cirque du Soleil performers in this picture here, you and sometimes need to be a contortionist, especially when you're dealing with technology. Technology will affect you when you least expect it. I've had to give entire talks when halfway through my talk, the projector died. And I could have stopped giving my talk, or I could go on, try to go through it as best as I can. And I can tell you that people were appreciative that I at least put in the effort to go forward. It wasn't the best talk I gave, but people identified with the situation, they saw the flexibility, and I think it was one of my best received talks. Another key aspect, and this is in some ways easier to do virtually and very hard to do in person, always face your audience. You have two shoulders. I don't want to see your shoulders being more than about 30 degrees from your audience, or at least members of your audience. So like the people sitting in front of these mirrors here, if you're going to be turning away from your audience, think carefully. So even though they're not facing their audience, they use the mirrors to face the audience. One of the hardest things that people do is they want to read off their slides. When you read off your slide, you're no longer facing your audience. Now, another thing that's hard, but it's an important part of stage presence is making eye contact. I'm going to teach you a trick. You don't actually have to make eye contact. You can look over the very last row of people and everyone will assume you're looking at the person behind them. But by just appearing to make eye contact, by scanning the room, people feel a connection to you, much like this puppy and this young child feel the connection to each other. And a big one for stage presence, and one I often fail to do, is breathe. If you breathe between sentences, you will slow down. If you slow down, you will be a more comprehensible speaker, especially to people for whom English is not their first language. I am a fast talker. Breathing can at least slow me down, but I have to remember to do it. Now, online, you won't see this as much, but I'm a pacer. So oftentimes, when I was younger, I would pace back and forth, giving my talk. Unless you're moving on purpose, if you're moving anything below the lower half of your body, try not to. Now, there are times I've danced in presentations before, and so that was on purpose. But really, avoid movement when at all possible. Now, I said the lower body, some of us speak with our hands. You've probably seen in the upper right corner of your screens me doing that. It's good, in my opinion, to use your hands to emphasize points. But you have to do so within reason. This gentleman here is probably being a little bit too emphatic with both his hand gesture and his tongue gesture. If possible, I like to bring in props into my talks to illustrate a key point or two. Unfortunately, all my best props for astronomy are in my office in the university, and I haven't been to my office in the university more than once since March. So if possible, use a prop to illustrate your point. However, you want to probably avoid bad puns, just like I have left you guys with this prop here. Now I want to get to the last bit of the talk, which is about details. And I will tell you that details really matter. So what you need to do is you need to spell check, you need to fact check. These are all important things. One of the big problems, in my opinion, is laser pointers. We often like to use laser pointers to focus on something. Please don't. To use a laser pointer, you often have to look backwards. That's bad. Instead, try to use words, try to use animations in PowerPoint, try to use different cues to visually show what you're talking about without using a laser pointer. Many people are actually dyslexic, and there's been great research that fonts matter on how people interpret text. So there are these things called serifs, and I'll show you serifs in the next slide. They make talks very pretty, but they also make them hard to read. So I always prefer to use some of the sans serif fonts. I often stick with Arial, which is known to be one of the most readable fonts. Some people like to change it up. Please, please, please avoid Comic Sans or handwriting fonts unless you're doing it on purpose, for instance, talking to young children. The Higgs boson press release was done in Comic Sans to much derision within the physics community. In this middle plot here, middle text here, I show an actual serif font. The serifs are these little embellishments you can see on the letters. The capital R shows this in particular. So if you compare the word Rockwell, the second and the third sentence, you'll see the difference between a serif font and a sans serif font. Rockwell is known to be one of the most legible serif fonts, so I occasionally use it, maybe for the title, but really I try to avoid it with visual presentations. Some details, I won't get into too much detail. Sometimes you can change things around, you can be a little bit intelligent. You're using a large font, let's say 28-point font or bigger, to make sure you minimize text on your screen, but just the spacing needs to be massaged a teensy-weensy bit. There are ways to do this. Consult your program. I've listed a few here, like line spacing and character spacing. Oftentimes in astronomy, we need to display text over images. If you're going to do that, you need to learn the power of things called shadows and glows. A shadow is often a little bit of the same text down and to a different direction. For instance, this white shadow on the black. Glows surround the entire text, and you can even do shadows and glows together. I love glows. Other people love shadows. When we present in person, one of the things you're going to want to watch out for is the dark slide. Astronomers love dark slides. The problem is that unless your projector is very high contrast, the projector is going to destroy your talk. Trust me, I have many talks where red on black is so illegible for symbols, let alone text, as I'll show you in a second, that it is not worth doing. If you have to, go bold with your text, go bold with your images. Think about color combinations. You want to avoid blue on black, red on black. You want to avoid yellow on white. Heck, I try to avoid yellow, period. But it's not just color combinations like that. You also want to think that in astronomy and other sciences where there's an overrepresentation of males, 10% of the people you're talking to could be colorblind. So you want to pick a palette that is safe for colorblind and use this throughout your images. This is my favorite colorblind palette. It gives you the most options. It covers most types of colorblindness. I will leave this up with the details so you can come back to this later on YouTube if you're interested, or you could always contact me at civicoff@ualberta.ca. Finally, in terms of the details, oftentimes you have these slides that you see in a publication. On the left, you see what I thought was a great image I made as a graduate student in one of my first papers. And yet, every time I present this image these days, I present the image on the right, where I have, by hand, edited the axes and the labels to make them nice and big so people in the back of the room can see them. And I'm sure I could go on and on and on, but a good speaker knows when to stop. But they also know how to help the audience know that they're stopping. So I like to summarize. So for this talk, there were 3 keys to creating a strong science talk. First, work on becoming a good storyteller. And I think the best way you can become a good storyteller is to attend many talks. Because as you listen to people talk, you start to form your own opinion of their skills, which will impact your opinion of your own skills. You need to develop your stage presence. And the only way I know to do this is to give more talks. And finally, you need to pay attention to details. And since no person is an island, I suggest you ask your friends and colleagues for help in this. Thank you very much. I did not count how I did on time. I apologize if I went over. I'm happy to answer questions or potentially even do some live commenting on what people think and what people don't think. Ken, do you want me to just answer stuff from the Q&A or do you want to read it out?
Ken, you need to be unmuted, or I can actually read the questions from the Q&A. What do you prefer?
I can also read them myself, but.
Okay, go ahead, Greg.
So I think the first question I see here, I'm not going to answer because it's about photometry and a camera. I think that was for a general to Ken about the different ways you might do a how-to hour in the future. But the next thing is Astro Talks always have plots with mystical, normalized Greek labels on the axis that have little connection to anything one can imagine as physical. Then you need to mumble for effect. So I think that one of the key things here is that when you have a plot that doesn't have a meaningful symbol, a meaningful text axis, you have to unpack the jargon. You have to talk about maybe the right side of this image is brighter, the left side is fainter. Or this is whether you have higher energy photons or lower energy photons. So yes, it's absolutely a key point that especially if you're going to take something from the published literature, they're not necessarily the best for talks, and you have to edit them a lot. I spent an unreasonable amount of time editing even my very own plot for this effect. So there's a comment from Giulio. Sorry, that's from Ray Tomlin. Giulio Vanini says, Keynote Presenter is a nice tool for Android and iOS for controlling your presentation without turning. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are a bunch of tools. I have a little presentation remote that I used here, will help below my belt, so to speak. And that's how I controlled this presentation without even having to touch my keyboard. I normally always have one of these things. Don Starkey says, I'm Duten colorblind. I'm not sure which one that is. Oh, Deuteronomic. I can never pronounce it. Colorblind. So I appreciate your comments on a colorblind palette for presentations. Don't put browns and reds and violets in the same graph. The palette I suggested is safe for basically all of the different types of color blindness. There are a few colors that are a little bit iffy. So there's a question is, does AAVSO have a policy for their webinar presenters to observe the colorblind issue? And I would say, no, we don't, because this is an issue that I think most people are not as fully aware of. I think I'm more than happy to share the palette and share the suggestions. I even have in my PowerPoint presentations, I have made a colorblind safe palette with even fewer colors along the main colors. And that's what I use for talks. When I'm making plots, that's what I use for plots. I will tell you that the AAVSO's own light curve generators themselves are not colorblind friendly. So there are some things that we may have to do behind the scenes. There's a question from Scott Donnell. Is it necessary to cite sources for images used on your slide when they fall under fair use? So Scott, this is a very loaded question. I am a person that if you actually, let me just put my screen back on. So if I hope you all are seeing now, nope, it doesn't look like you're seeing my slides. So I went through the effort of always citing my images. It can be clumsy at times. Do you have to? No, there are no police out there that are coming to arrest you if you don't. Is it good practice to? I would say it's absolutely good practice to. Personally, I don't like adding the reference slide at the end of my talks because I'd much rather end on a slide that is my key points of my talks rather than a slide that is having to do with who my references were. So it's a tough balance that you have to actually to do that. So Bert has a comment that it's not true that light curve generator isn't colorblind safe because they use a different symbol for every band. And he has a very good point. I have a whole nother presentation on how to make good plots. And one of the things is that you don't always rely on color. It is true that light curve generator version 2 does use those different symbols and is much better than light curve generator version 1 when it came to color blindness. So I apologize for the dispersing comment on LCG version 2. I was just thinking about the color aspect itself, not the combination of the symbol and the color. I'm cognizant that we may be over time for the questions, Ken. Is that true? You're muted, Ken. Ken, you're still muted.
Ken seems to say yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so perhaps.
I'll give one quick answer to Blaine. The first question, yes, you can do photometry with your DSLR using RGB. It's translated to TR, TG, and TB.
Cool. So one of the things I would like to do right now is actually move to the second presentation just for the sake of time. However, if our speakers are willing, we can stay a little bit over. No one's forcing us to get out. For those of our participants who want to leave, they can leave it, but we can continue this conversation. And as I mentioned, we are on YouTube Live as well, so we can address questions from there as well.
Okay, Greg has unshared, so I will share my screen and open the presentation and switch to slideshow mode. Okay, good. I hope all of you can hear me. And Greg, can you see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes, your screen is clear, loud and clear, so to speak.
Great. Ed and I have collaborated on this presentation. It obviously concerns archery, as I'm sure you can tell from the first slide. But what we wanted to do was help individuals decide how good their data was and is it good enough. So we did several things, as I'm sure many of you have done over the years. First, you want to assess what accuracy you have, and there are a variety of ways of doing that. You can either use a single comparison star, which I am adamantly opposed to, or you can use ensembles. And there are, in fact, reasons for using a single comp in some circumstances. You can also do something called transformation. So you can choose either to not transform your data or to transform. Again, I'm a strong proponent of transforming your data. It does require some money in the sense that it needs multiple filters and more time to take your images. What we've also done in this presentation is to unpack the terms precision and accuracy, because they do mean different things, as I hope most of you know. Precision relates actually to your repeatability. It is also referred to as random noise and random error. And it's usually defined by a term called standard deviation. And it means you've calculated a mean of your images, your magnitudes, and a standard deviation which relates to how they vary from that mean. The other term that often gets confused with that is accuracy. As a chemist, I've been very concerned about that in my analyses. It is actually a bias. It is a systematic error, not a random error. It effectively is how well you agree with a true magnitude. Now you could ask what a true magnitude means. It's a magnitude that's been accepted by analysis, hopefully through various methods. And hopefully they give the same number. So that's what the known or true magnitude is. In our case, we've chosen to use Landolt magnitudes as our reference. I'm sure you've all seen the slide, again, from an archery phenomenon, where we have in the upper left-hand corner a very unrepeatable and a very unreliable measure. In the lower right-hand corner, we have a very repeatable and a very reliable measure. Now, what does that mean, and how can we correlate that to what we do regularly? If you put two hands up in front of your face, you count them, there's certainly two. If you take one away, there's one. There's a 100% variation between those two numbers. And typically when we're doing our analyses, when we may be doing visual observing, we look up at a star in the sky, we turn our head maybe 30 degrees to go to, assuming it's a bright star, we turn our head 30 degrees to a comparison star that has another magnitude. Let's say one was 3 and one was 4. I'm sure you can guess that, in fact, it's not difficult. In fact, it's quite trivial to determine which one is brighter than the other. And if we had a third star that was perhaps 4th magnitude, we could probably make a pretty good estimate that one was at magnitude 3, one was magnitude 4, and one was magnitude 5. But let's assume we want to do better than that. Let's say we wanted to get a 10% accuracy. That's easy, in fact. That's getting to a 10th magnitude difference between our measurements from one to another. In the lower right-hand corner, what we hope to get, and requires moderate effort, something that we do regularly, I hope for most of you photometrists, we achieve about 100th of a magnitude precision or error. And that's probably what most of us do in our relatively poor skies in suburban environments. It frankly is, as a chemist, I know that it was extremely difficult, not impossible, but difficult to get within a 10th% precision. And that would typically amount to 1,000th of a magnitude or a millimag. So those are the ranges of precisions and accuracies that you can achieve. Now, Ed and I did a study with Landolt stars, as we're going to discuss. We chose not to look at variable stars. I'm sure you've all measured a magnitude of one of your stars like Xi Cygni, and then looked at the light curve generator to see how everybody else did. And you said, oh my goodness, I'm 0.2 of a magnitude off. That's horrible. And in reality, it might be, but perhaps not in every case, especially if you're using a DSLR. We'll talk about that later. Ed and I have different telescopes and different cameras, as you can see them listed here. And I also chose to use some new data from the New Hampshire BSM telescope, which has a CMOS camera, the ASI 183. because many of you have asked the question in the forums over the last few months, can I use the CMOS camera? It's less expensive than a CCD, though there are expensive ones too. And is that a good idea? We chose to use multiple images. We achieved multiple magnitudes and used mean analysis. We used multiple filters, obviously, because that's the only way you can really do transformation. We chose Landolt standards, and George Silvers has been kind enough to put a table together of standard field stars. This is just an example of that. And if you search on standard fields on the AAVSO website, you'll get to this web page. And it helps you identify where they are in terms of right ascension and declination. These are 12 and 0. There are a 10-minute field of view, and there are 2 stars. 70 and 34 is the next one down. As we always do, we calibrate our stars. We do bias, dark, and flats analysis. We process our images with VPHOT or Lev photometry. A hint, Pierre de Pompierre is on the group today, and he's the creator of Lev photometry, which is an excellent photometry program. For our untransformed magnitudes, we conducted BVRI analysis. We used one comp, or we used an ensemble of multiple comps. And we used multiple standard comps in this case, which are Landolt standards. We also transformed our magnitudes. We used one comp in one case or multiple comps in another. And again, we had multiple targets. We chose Landolt standards, Landolt comps to be our targets. We calculated means and standard deviations as you normally would. We calculated observed minus known or true Landolt magnitudes. You'll see why we computed absolute values of those in a minute. We visualized our results in a linear regression of O minus K versus B minus V. You'll see those. And we also produced bar plots and whisker and box plots. So I'm going to let Ed take over with what he did with his analysis of 5 landed fields during the last winter.
Thank you, Ken, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. So I'm going to show you 3 different views of the analyses that I did on my 5 fields. The first view is a view of the linear regression of combining all OK values from all fields. This way we got our sample size up. We could do a little bit of baby statistics with it. So this is a plot. The x-axis is color. We have things tending towards the blue on the left and things tending towards the red on the right. And then on the y-axis, we have the observed minus known magnitude differences, both overestimates and underestimates. That is to say, they're not absolute values. The important thing is not all the dots, although I will show you on the far right, you have a blue and a kind of an orange dot. Those are untransformed values of the same transformed values that are found in the diamond-shaped ones above, directly above them. The dashed lines are untransformed using 1 comp or 2 comps. This is pretty typical for my B filter. And the solid lines show the results of transformed, the analysis when they're transformed. The black line is 1 comp. The red line, which also has, is all comps. That is to say, 1 target at a time, 1 check, and all the other Landolt standards used for the entire analysis being an ensemble. And hidden behind that is a 2 comp analysis. Now, the sense of this is, go back, the sense of this is if you have transformed your data and you have a horizontal line at O minus K of 0.0, you are perfectly transformed. The more slope you have, the less perfect the transformation is. The next view shows us, we're going to unpack this a bit and look at accuracy and precision. And we're going to do this with absolute values of OK. And the reason we use absolute values is the average of -1 and +1 is 0, which looks perfect. But yet you're 1 off both ways. So we use absolute values in this particular case. These box and whiskers plots give us an idea of 2 parameters, well, really 3, average and median, And then the size of the box gives us a rough estimate of precision. The smaller the box, the smaller the quadrillae are in the analysis, the more precise the result is. So on the left-hand side, we have 2 untransformed results. And on the right-hand side, we have 4 transformed results, the gray being 1 comp, the yellow being 2 comps, the blue being the entire ensemble. And then just for fun, I've also included AAVSO data for 4 of the 5. So these are data that have not been reduced by us. These are data that are available as AAVSO data from the CDS. And you will notice, of course, that we do much better transforming than we, in fact, marginally better precise data, at least for the full ensemble, than the AAVSO data itself. Next slide. This is simply a histogram summarizing the average absolute OK values. And you can see on the left, untransformed data are not as accurate as on the right, the 4 views of transformed data. We can now move to the, oh, yes, sorry about that. We did a little bit of statistics. There's not very complicated statistics here. We think that the data speak for themselves, but we did a little bit of it. So for the B filter, 1 comp non-transformed versus 1 comp transformed, the null hypothesis is there is no difference between the two, is statistically significantly different. However, if we look at 1 comp transformed and our full ensemble transformed, statistically, there is no difference in the mean values, even if the precision looks greater with the ensemble. Next slide. So we move to the Cousins I filter, and we have exactly the same sort of plot. We have the dashed lines being the least squares fit for the untransformed data, and the solid lines, all of which are layered over each other, being a view of the transformed data. And for my I filter in my camera, I get an almost perfect transformation in the Cousins I filter group. The box and whiskers show the precision and accuracy. Left-hand slide again, left-hand part of the slide again are the 2 box plots with the untransformed. The 3 to the right are 1, 2, and an all ensemble look. Again, the all ensemble look, although the means and the medians are not different in any transformation, we get a little bit more precision when we do a full ensemble. We do not have an AAVSO example of this because they're in Sloan I and not in Cousins I. Next slide. This is just a summary of the average OK values for the 5 different treatments, untransformed on the left and transformed on the right, with virtually nothing to say about the transformed other than they were well transformed. Finally, we look at the V filter. My V filter is particular. It has a very, how can I say it? The transformation coefficients are almost nil, which means that my transformation for these particular data are really no different than the untransformed results themselves. You will note, however, that the OK y-axis scale is much different than the OK y-axis scale on the other 2. Not that you were keeping tabs on that, but all of this occurs between 0.02 and -0.02 OK, which means that, in the next slide, there's no difference between transforming and not transforming these data. But there is a caveat to that. That's my filter and my camera. It may not be your filter and your camera. And finally, we look at the boring results of the average OKs over all treatments with the V filter, and we see that they are essentially the same. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ken.
Thanks, Ed. I particularly just emphasized one standard field analysis, SA38, because it was up high in the sky from me since I'm in the Northern Hemisphere. I happen to have a Excuse me for 1 second. I have a STL6303 CCD. Again, in the CMOS case, it has the ASI 183 from ZWO CMOS camera. And again, I chose to use the same whisker box plot, histogram, and regression analysis that Ed showed previously. I've displayed them a little differently here. I've made them in groups of 4. The blue ones are obviously the blue, green, red, and infrared. And the basic thing I'd like to show here again is consistent with what Ed showed. Typically the first 2 of the 4 boxes are further away, larger O minus K values. In this case, the means, the X's on the screen are about 0.03. If you look at the 2 that have been transformed with either a single comp or multiple comps, the means, the X's again, are much closer to 0.01. Bottom line is, as you saw in Ed's results and in mine, typically we're getting agreement that is close to 0.01 magnitudes from the true value. In the case of the green, again, you see non-transformed followed by the smaller transformed. You'll see it in the red and the infrared. The differences are not as great. There may be less precision in some cases than in others. But again, this really means that my transformation coefficients, my filters, are closer to the original Johnson-Cousins filters. In other words, I have a coefficient for the color term of 1 and for the filter or magnitude terms of 0. One little interesting thing, I've put in my transformation coefficient, TBBV in the case of the Bs and TVBV. And you'll notice, in fact, that my blue filter transformation coefficient is larger than in the case of the green. And in fact, you can see generally, not exactly, but generally, that the improvement with transformation in the case of the B filters is larger than in the case of the green filters. And there is, in fact, and Gordon Myers and I gave a talk 3 years ago now in England at the AAVSO meeting that showed that you can calculate how divergent your result will be, how your agreement will disperse from the reality, the true value, depending on how big your coefficients are. So I propose that you go and look at that, if you will. A bar graph showing the same thing with effectively the same results, just a different visualization of the results. Transformation improves the results, and we saw in the box and whiskers that the precision also improved. This is the plot of O minus K versus color. And again, the intent is to show that when you have colors of targets that diverge from the comparison star that you used, in the middle perhaps, you will get a greater divergence from the 0 point. But when you do your transformation, you'll flatten out that curve, which means no matter what your color is, whether it's blue at the left-hand side or red at the right-hand side, you get less divergence from the true value. Again, you can see with very blue stars, we may have been off by 0.03 magnitudes, but when we transform, the difference is down to 1/100th of a magnitude. So I hope that you see that you really can improve the accuracy, this is really accuracy we're talking about here, of your measurements by transforming, and in most cases using an ensemble versus a single comp. This is now, and I think many of you will be interested, this is a CMOS camera. And again, I've deployed the 4 bars on the left for B, followed by green, followed by red. Ooh, notice a little difference here. What's going on here? Followed by infrared. Again, for the CMOS camera, slight improvement with transformation, as you'd hope. Slight improvement in precision as well. And in fact, the X's on the screen, I hope you can see those, where the means are. You may be off on mean by 0.03 with no transformation, single comp. You may improve to a level with transformation with an ensemble, down again to 0.01 magnitudes agreement. Just what you'd hope you would achieve by carrying out these additional procedures. You'll notice this little wrinkle in here. What happened to Ken to this R filter? It got worse with transformation. In fact, the little wrinkle here is that the camera in New Hampshire on the BSM telescope is not an Cousins R filter. it's a Sloan R filter. And in fact, I didn't have the right transformation coefficient used when I did my calculation for this, but I left it in, frankly. I could have repaired it. It shows, in fact, that when you obviously use a magnitude that's not an SR magnitude, but an R magnitude, you clearly, when you transform, will get a poorer result. You can correct for that by using the appropriate transformation coefficients. And in the case of infrared, we got nice agreement across the board because the coefficients, again, are close to 1 and 0. Again, same results with a different display with the bar graphs. And again, in the case of my V filter, if I don't transform, I get a relatively strong slope, 0.057 in this case. And again, at both the red end of the spectrum and at the blue end of the spectrum, I diverge significantly from our ideal 0 line. Maybe as far as 0.03 to 0.02. But again, when I transform, I get nice results that are much closer to 0. And I wanted to show you, because it's probably the question you're asking most, is do the CCD cameras and CMOS cameras we are able to use today give similar agreement? And I hope you will agree. Again, I'm going to show you a t-test in a second. In general, I think these are both on the same scales. The means with non-transformation are in the order of 0.03. And when we transform on the right of the two sets of bars, we get closer to 0.01, in this case about 0.015. So again, you see the improvement that you get. More importantly, I hope you agree that the similarities between both the CCD results and the CMOS results are quite good. This is now for the V filter. And again, slight improvement. Again, remember my V filter coefficients are quite good, close to 1 and 0. So there's not as much of a difference between non-transformed and transformed. But again, what I'd like you to see, again, is on the left-hand side with the CCD and the right-hand side with the CMOS, the results are very similar. That 0.034, again, don't stick with one number. One number doesn't mean much of anything. You need to look at the means. So the agreements are very good, is what I hope you get out of this. We both did, Ed in fact did this. He's the statistician, I'm not. For the B filter case, comparing the CCD and CMOS, and in the case of the V filter, the p-values are not sufficiently good, not less than 0.05, for example. So they were statistically similar. And that's what I hoped you saw visually when you looked at the two slides. So I think we're just about out of time here, and I'll stop and show you a couple of conclusions and recommendations. So how can you improve your data? The most obvious thing, and the thing that's done not very often, to tell you the truth, is to take multiple images when you're doing your imaging. One image, one magnitude, one concentration as a chemist is not a valid number. It could be, but you saw some of the spans we had in our precision in the other slides. You really should take multiple images. One's a bad number. Two's almost as bad. It either could be one or the other, and they could be quite extreme. 3 is a heck of a lot better. 7 to 10 would be ideal, but I think, to be honest with you, most of us are not going to spend the time to take 7 replicate images of the same thing because we want to go on to other targets. Quantity sometimes does drive us to do that. Ideally, when you pick your comparison star, if you matched your comparison star color with your target color, you wouldn't even have to transform at all. You would get perfect agreement between the two. Again, my preference for all of you is to use multiple comparison stars. And again, in that case, in one image, not multiple images, you can get multiple magnitudes from each of the estimated magnitudes for the target from each of those individual comparison stars. So it's sort of a shortcut to take a single image, but get multiple magnitudes to calculate a mean from. Again, if you can spend the money and the time and effort, get some multiple filters, either BVRI, which are the old standard, or perhaps the Sloan standards. We all know it's getting more difficult to buy some of these. Hopefully they won't go away completely. So get them while you can. Ideally, I'd propose also that you transform your magnitudes, as I hope you've seen the improvement we've shown you previously. Again, this is just a repeat of Ed's slide from previously. Again, this happens to be a very nice example with the two boxes on the left with 75th percentile and 25th percentile show wide divergence of O minus K. In fact, it gets to approach greater than 1/10 of a magnitude. And on the right-hand side, much improved precision and much improved accuracy. And that's what you hope you get from transformation. And you can see the APAS data has similar precision and accuracy. So we're in good company. And similar slides that I've had from my CCD. I won't go through that with any great care. And just a general summary. How can you improve your data precision? And on the next slide, your accuracy. I think statistically, what Ed and I showed was with the dark blue arrow, is that when you go from non-transformation to transformation, you show statistically significant improvement. But when you go necessarily from a single comp to a multiple comp situation, it's light blue boxes, arrows, and that means it's not as confident a result. Same thing is found for accuracy. So how much accuracy, how much improvement have we achieved? With a single comp non-transformation, you may have something on the order of 1/10 of a magnitude difference, bias with your results. As you do an ensemble, you may improve that to 0.05. As you transform with a single comp, you may get down to 0.03. And with an ensemble transformation, you may get to less than 0.01. So these are ways of improving that. Now, I put question marks here because especially for you DSLR people out there who have standard DSLR cameras with the standard RGB filters in them, their coefficients you will find, hopefully, are significantly divergent from 1 and 0. And in fact, these non-transform results in those cases may approach several tenths of a magnitude. Yes, I meant that specifically, several tenths of a magnitude bias between your result and the true or known result. So I will stop there, and I think we're finished on time, ahead of time. And my main question for all of you as you ask your questions, and I hope you do, is what are you willing to do? Yes, it takes time. It takes effort. In some cases, frankly, it takes some money. But I hope that all of you understand what we've tried to show here, and I hope we've given confidence to those CMOS camera owners out there that yes, their results are appropriate and adequate and in good agreement with the CCD measurements that we've been doing up till now.
Ken, I might make a couple of comments. You inspired me to actually get my 80 millimeter refractor hooked up with filters and a CMOS camera, and I was quite pleased with the results. So I'm going to use it as a Bright Star monitor camera for my own purposes. The other thing is that I spent a lot of time as an evolutionary biologist doing what is called ecological forecasting, which is essentially taking geographic data, figuring out what the niche of a species is, and then predicting what would happen to it with things like global climate change. And what ground into my psyche was, if you want to find out how good you are, you have to try to measure things for which you already know the results. And this is something that anyone with a CCD, a CMOS or DSLR camera can do with these Landolt fields, because now there's a variety of them that one can access almost any time of the year. But don't be too put off by the Landolt uncertainties. As I understand it, and I may be wrong, when you see a magnitude with a Landolt error of 0.001, that is actually a mean. That's actually the error of a mean of means, which means that it's actually a standard error, not a standard deviation. And so if you unpack that, the actual average standard deviation is the square root of the number of nights for which the measurements were taken times the error. So it could be if you did 10 nights and you had a 0.001 standard error, which is the correct way to do it. But if you want to look at any average night standard deviation, probably about 0.01. So don't be put off. Don't be put off by the fact you're not getting 0.001 accuracy. To do that, you would have to do 10 nights, not one night.
And I'd like to show something really quick. If you guys can stop sharing your screen, I want to emphasize that point with a nice visual.
Yep, let me stop sharing here. I think you should be able to share again, Greg.
Okay. So if you can see my screen now, I believe you guys can. I have the same exact data taken from data that I presented yesterday on a black log straight binary taken by an AAVSO individual. They took a time series of data, and on the left, we see their time series. And if you're not used to looking at these time series, you don't see any patterns in there. But by taking means of data and using the standard error technique that Ed just talked about, you get the light curve on the right with the same exact data. And that is the proper light curve. So taking means, using the standard error, will actually get you much better data for use. And as a professional astronomer, this is what I actually do when I take the ensemble of data that gets presented to me by multiple observers. I often use this technique anyway.
I think that's a really good example. And the other thing, Greg, is, a lot of people worry about, well, you're a little bit, especially with visuals. Well, you're an overestimator and you're an underestimator. But if everyone has some sort of systematic bias, but if it's not the same systematic bias, the means turn out to be just fine.
So we should probably move on to the Q&A. Do you guys want me to read out the Q&A to you since you're two people?
If you could, Greg, that would be great.
Sure. Unless Stella, you wanted to do that. Nope. Perfect. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm on multiple computers. All right. So Molly Wakeland asked, what does transforming mean? And is it necessary to do if you're using a CCD in the linear regime with photometric filters?
Ken, do you want to take that?
I'm embarrassed to say, Greg, I was reading another question here. Forgot to listen. So if you could repeat.
Sure. What does transforming mean? And is it necessary to do if you're using a CCD in the linear regime with photometric filters? And that's from Molly.
Yes, Molly. Yes. Transformation is correcting your results to be equivalent to the same filter used by Johnson Cousins way back when. Your manufacturer didn't manufacture it exactly the same. It's probably the same formula, but not quite the same. So your filter will not be quite the same in its color characteristics as the original Johnson Cousins. So yes, you need to calculate your transformation coefficients by analyzing a standard field like M67. If you use TG on the website, Transformation Generator, you can do that. And then you can apply those transformation coefficients with TA in VFOT, Transformation Applier, and transform your magnitudes to standard magnitudes. I think I answered that question. I hope I did.
I think so. It's a second order correction, but a very important second order correction.
Yes, it's on the order of, generally for CCD cameras with Johnson Cousins filters, as you saw, on the order of a few hundredths of a magnitude. In the case of DSLR, where you don't have Johnson Cousins filters, but an RGB filter set, those differences can be on the order of tenths of magnitudes. Keep that in mind.
So Michael Freeberg points out that for TG, I assume the T is actually transformed, but for the green, the G filter essentially from a DSLR is also a benefit to transform the data. I would argue that it's almost always a benefit to transform the data as long as you do what Ken said and transform the data to the right filter.
Yes, yes. So yes, you can use your DSLR photometry and report that as TG, TR, and TB if you desire, or you can choose to go to the effort, I hope you will, of determining your coefficients yourself and doing a more correct and accurate transformation.
So let me just ask a quick question, since some people are going to be new to this idea of transformations. Is that transformation coefficients? Do you need to do that once ever for your telescope filter combination? Once per year? Once per night? How often do you need to do a transform calculation or coefficient calculation?
Well, yeah, it depends on what you're doing. So some people do all sky photometry and they essentially do it every night. This is the professional way of doing it. I try to do it, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 times, sometimes 4 times a year, kind of varying with the seasons, just to check up on things.
My best recommendation is that you do it every 6 months and look at your own results and see how much they vary. As from my practice with my own telescope, I have a coefficient that's more than a year old from the more recent one I did, and they are within the same standard deviation, within the same error band as the original ones. So yes, they don't change very much, hopefully, and try it more than, perhaps every 6 months or every year, do them again and compare them and see how much they've changed. That's the safest way.
Yeah. So the takeaway I get from that is that getting these transformation coordinates is not an expensive thing to do in terms of your time.
Well, I try to take 3 nights. So right now, NGC 7790, my most favorite one, is up, and I'll take 3 nights of data and I'll do transformation generator on those. Then I'll average them out and try to make sure that I don't have any kind of wonky results.
And is that 3 full nights or just 3 or 3 time during 3 nights?
I usually do 10 images, 10 field images, and then I take the average value, et cetera, just like we do with doing our accuracy program.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. David Kraft says, I'm very new, taking no data yet. My Johnson-Cousins filters are modern with rectangular, also known as flat top passband shapes. Is there a reference showing the best way to cope?
The best way to coat them?
Cope, C-O-P-E. I apologize for my mispronunciation. How do you deal with the modern filters compared to the Johnson-Cousins filters? I think the answer is transformation.
Yes, and in fact, I'd like to give a shout out to Gordon, who's listening right now, Gordon Myers, for creating TG. There are a few cute little trick workarounds. The bottom line is, we all know right now, Sloan magnitudes don't exist on the comparison database. They will soon, I hope, exist, and you can do a direct Sloan to Sloan transformation. However, there is a trick to allow you to transform from your Sloan magnitudes to a Johnson-Cousins magnitudes by just renaming the filter in VFOT and pretending it's a V magnitude instead of a TG magnitude. And you will then get the transformation coefficient that is real for that Sloan G filter. And it will be higher than 1, higher than 1.1 in most cases, something like 1.2. So yes, that's the way you would do it. I hope I made it somewhat clear. If you send an email or a post at some point on photometry or VFOT, I'll help give you a further answer.
So I've been deleting some questions that we've already answered. So I apologize to those people for not announcing their names, but out of time consideration, I've been doing that. So there's a question of, can VFOT use comparison colors for ensemble photometry that would do the transform?
Okay, I think that relates to what I said earlier. If you happen to have selected a comparison star that had an identical color to your target star, you in fact would not have to transform at all. Effectively, you have the same color for both, and they should not need correction. Did that answer the question, Greg, or not quite?
I think it did. I'm not sure if the person, I feel like it did.
I will answer it one more way. If you use an ensemble of comparison stars, they clearly have a variety of colors compared to the target. And if you assume that you've got colors that are both bluer and redder than the target, the average of those colors is probably closer to what the target is. And in that case, you would get, again, a closer agreement and a better agreement with the known magnitude. So it sort of helps to do, yeah, okay.
I agree with that. The one thing you should be aware about is if for some reason your target happens to be a very red or very blue object, that the ensemble averaging in this case may actually make things slightly worse. In that case, what you want to do is you want to take an ensemble of stars with the same color.
Yes.
So let's see, we have a question from Miroslav Smolka. Which is better, averaging a series of images and processing the resulting image, or processing each image individually and averaging the results? How long do you have for an answer?
Yeah, Ed and I argued about this all the time. I'm sort of going to punt and say, honestly, they are similar, perhaps not identical. I'm not a mathematician, so you can't quote me on that. But they both give you multiple magnitudes. In one case, you view multiple images to do that. In one case, one image and multiple comparison stars. I think you can probably accept that they are meant to give similar representative values of the mean. So I think I'll leave it there. And if any other mathematician wants to chime in, so be it.
I'll chime in. And so I would say that years ago, when detectors had bad read noises or had large, or well, dark current really doesn't affect this, but had large read noises, there was a lot to be said for observing for longer and minimizing the amount of times that you had to read out your information. However, many modern detectors are themselves at higher read noises, or lower read noises. So you can get into the nitty gritty as long as you're in a regime where you're getting at least 25-ish counts electrons after your gain, so 25 divided by your gain. I think that they are effectively the same. And so because of that, I'm actually more likely to say, take shorter observations and get the multiple data. Personally, you'll take a slight hit to the error, but you also may find interesting things that may actually be physically relevant. But that was based on my talk yesterday. And I don't know if you disagree or agree.
I got no dog in that fight.
Fair enough. All right. So anonymous attendee asks, for new observations to be maximally consistent with past observations, precisely which BVR filter set does AAVSO recommend? Do we recommend one?
No. And I guess to be honest with you, trying to correct your result to agree with some past result is an exercise in futility. You have to accept, do the things that we've done. Prove to yourself what your own accuracy and precision are using your own images, and then trust those. The bottom line is, historically, comparison stars were selected from a variety of different catalogs. And that is the best way of getting poor accuracy. If you look at some of the catalogs that are available now, and I just picked the name Tycho out, you will not get the same reported magnitude as you will from APAS, for example. Fortunately now, virtually all of the comparison star sequences that are created by the sequence team use the APAS catalog. So internally, they're all consistent. They may be off by some bias from the Tycho, and they certainly are, but at least they're internally consistent. In fact, most people, like Joe Patterson at CBA, Center for Backyard Astrophysics, adjusts all of our imagers, our observers' data, so he corrects for this bias that may exist from one person's comparison stars to one person's camera. In reality, that's what's done when you get to the really small differences that exist between one observer and another. There's just no way to avoid that you will potentially have a difference. You just try to minimize that to the best of your ability.
So I think this is related to another question that says, from Matthew Note, perhaps I wasn't fully understanding, but is it acceptable to transform using, say, APAS magnitudes in field rather than Landolt standards taken in the same night?
Yes and no. The best choice would be what's called a primary standard. And in fact, our Landolt standard magnitudes are accepted as primary standards. I'm sure Arnie and his standard error of the mean typically approach 0.005 or so magnitudes. I think Arnie will agree, I'm sure he's on here somewhere, that the APAS magnitudes don't have quite that same precision. They generally have many fewer observations. In fact, that's one of the reasons. And they typically have precisions on the order of 0.02. So again, it depends on what catalog you're using, what set of comparison stars you decide, and how good or bad your transformation coefficients are. You do more effort, you get better results. That's the bottom line.
So Brad Veet basically said we have many aging astronomers and aging CCD cameras. As we're forced to replace these and adapt, I hope he's talking about the cameras. I'm interested in the other type of transformation from CCD cameras to CMOS cameras.
Transformation, how? Buying instruments or a difference in the photometry?
I'm not sure which. Maybe he means both. I think he means the transformation from us using CMOS cameras, but also then applying the transformation techniques.
Well, I hope, Brad, that we showed, in fact, that there really is no difference between a CMOS result, at least for the cameras we're talking about, and the CCD cameras that Ed and I used. They gave equivalent results. We used the same transformation techniques in both cases. And in fact, in general, you're still using the same Johnson-Cousins filter in either of the two cameras. In fact, in the case of BSN New Hampshire, those filters that are used on the CMOS camera were those that originally used on the CCD camera, the ST10, that was used in New Hampshire. I hope that answers your question somewhat, Brad.
So I'm just cognizant of the time. I'm happy to stay here and answer questions. It's now 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, and 9 p.m. UTC. I just want to say, for all those people who feel the need to leave, thank you so much for attending the How To Hour section. I'm happy to stay on. Ken, are you happy to stay on?
Well, yes,
18 questions.
There's one question from Dennis Conti that I do want to respond to related to exoplanets, because that's a hot topic as well. Stella, do you want to say a few words before we do that, or I'll proceed?
Not at all. For those who want to leave, I would like to wish you a happy evening or afternoon or whatever your time zone is. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll reconvene tomorrow for the third day of the annual AAVSO meeting, and I'll be happy to stay here for as long as you guys want to. This is a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, we still have 155 people still online.
Yeah.
And
Go for it.
Dennis,
could I respond to one of the questions I see on the screen before you go to the Conti question?
I'm going to forget, but go ahead.
Donald Smith asked, can you point to a reference for the transforming process? And the answer is the CCD manual at the AAVSO site. Gives you all that you need to know to get started in transformation.
And if you go to the AAVSO website under the data tab and data analysis tab, you will see a transformation link, and you will get to both the TG documentation and download position, and also a reference to TA, which is now not a self-standing program. George Silvas ported his program, thankfully, to VFOT, so that's where you'd find it. You don't need to be a VFOT user to use it there, but it's available if you choose to use Transform Applier to a time series.
So I have posted the link that Ken just talked about in the chat window. I can't instantly find the one that Ed talked about. So I apologize, but there's at least that one link. I'm sure it has links to the CCD manual.
Yeah, that's 02:48 p.m. Donald Smith. And you have it tagged as you would like to answer this question live.
Oh,
but I've already answered it.
Oh, no. I just, that was me marking it and it's done now. So that's just, so do you want to, Ken, do you want to go on to Dennis's question?
I had just because I saw it there and I thought I'd answer it. Dennis asked, from what you've learned in your testing, what takeaways could be applied to improving accuracy in time series photometry, such as exoplanet observing? As Dennis knows well, and Karen Collins always is pushing for, in fact, the first things to start with for everybody are to Do your flats corrections as best as you can. That's number one. And the second thing is, again, and it's not the easiest thing to do necessarily, is to guide your images, guide your camera as best you can. Ideally, if you can keep it within 1 pixel, that would be ideal. If you can keep within 1 or 2 pixels, that again would be very ideal. And that's what everybody should attempt to do. Now, whether anything that Ed and I have talked about would help as well. As most of us know, AIJ, Ask Image for J, is used by certainly the test members who are part of the SG1 team. And they use that program to calculate the magnitudes, the fluxes actually, of the target stars as the planet transits in front of the star. I think in most cases, we're taking individual images over a time series and frankly spend very little effort at trying to do a transformation or an ensemble, though AIJ again effectively does an ensemble by using multiple comparison stars to determine a total flux to use as a ratio. So Dennis, I haven't completely answered your question. I think perhaps much of what we've done doesn't help. Again, the most important things in my mind from the point of view of accuracy are, again, flat correction and guiding to keep yourself within as small a number of pixels as possible.
So I don't do exoplanets. I do eclipsing binaries, and the amount of accuracy you want compared to the amount of precision you want are really two different questions here. So if I'm trying to generate data, and those data will be used for modeling a system, then I need to have accurate BV and VI magnitudes for things like color, so that the modelers can use that. If what I'm doing is timing minima, I'm much more interested in precision than I am in accuracy of the magnitudes that are obtained. So I think the question is why do you need greater accuracy? To what end do you need greater accuracy in exoplanet transit work as compared to greater precision?
It's a good point. In fact, that's one of the other significant questions that's asked over and over again related to time series and measurements that really are more concerned with temporal variation than photometric variation. It's at what time does a particular event happen? And in that case, you really don't care at all. You want to be somewhat close, but you don't care much about what the absolute magnitude of your star is.
Unless you have to share the data with another guy who's taken the same data, then you do have to.
Yes. And then, as I mentioned, what Joe Patterson does is he manually adjusts the results because most people, even in that group, don't transform their data. They run rapid cadence, in many cases, C filter images where you really can't transform effectively. So they are most concerned with this temporal variation, the time variation, and don't worry about or adjust manually the photometric, the magnitude adjustment.
So this leads directly into one of the next questions, which was from Bob Buckheim. Hi, Greg. Could you elaborate a bit on the math in your data analysis example? So first thing, I want to start by saying that the data I took were actually CV observations of CVs. So they were actually data probably from someone that I assume does a lot of work with Joe Patterson. So I was very much interested in the temporal aspect of the time series. So what I did is I did an exceptionally simple version of binning where I set what the time resolution I wanted my bins to be, such that I had multiple data points within each bin. It turned out that on average, I had about 11 data points per bin. Then I applied a weighted mean calculation because estimated precisions were included in the data file, and I calculated the weighted mean of the error, which is the exact equivalent to a standard error of the mean in the case where all the errors are exactly the same. And it's actually, I prefer a weighted error. I prefer the error on the weighted error mean instead of a standard error personally. Now, if I'm being absolutely honest, at 11 data points, what I did was a quick and dirty analysis. I have other more statistically robust analyses where instead of using a mean, I might use a median. And instead of using the standard deviation to calculate the standard deviation of the mean, I would probably use the median absolute deviation multiplied by the standard factor of this. That's a lot of math without any detailed math. What I can say is that I will potentially, after I take my vacation, work a little bit on making these things more clear, because I actually think that when we plot stuff in LCG, that they're showing the standard deviation and not the standard error. And depending on what you want, you may actually want the standard error. Now, so that aspect, that addresses some different aspects. So in terms of Dennis's question about the techniques, if for some reason you think that you may have some stability issue where all of a sudden you were off a pixel, for instance, the techniques where you say, I'm going to sacrifice some timing resolution for doing some of this binning, and whether you're using a weighted mean, a mean, or a median, will actually allow you to remove the effect of that less good data point. So that's another way in which you can do things. It's this exquisite balance between how fast you want to take your data, how precise you want your data to be, and how accurate you want your data to be. And there's no silver bullets.
I just might comment, I've got a 2-hour trip to the observatory this afternoon to finish setting up a telescope. So I'm going to be leaving fairly soon, but I just want to respond to one that I saw here from Barbara Harris. Absolutely. I love using the transform applier program, but you can only use it with one comparison star. Is there an easy way to transform with ensemble photometry? And the answer is less V photometry.
Yeah. In fact, Barbara, just a little hint for you. Very soon, time series transformation will be available in VFOT courtesy of George Silvers. So keep the faith. It will be there soon. Oh, excuse me. However, you'll still only be able to do single photometry, single comp. Yes. Sorry about that.
But Leslie will.
Yeah, Lev photometry, courtesy of Pierre Dupont-Pierre, will allow you to do that, an ensemble time series transformation. So take a look at it. I had 2 questions I wanted to answer if I could, Greg.
Actually, but with Ed potentially having to leave,
yep.
Can we see if there's any other ones that he was a priority on?
Okay, sure. Any others that you saw there, Ed?
No, I don't think so. I'm just looking. I'm looking through here. I mean, many of the people who are not familiar with transforming their data simply need to get the CCD manual, which does, I think, an excellent job of that. If you want to do ensemble work, you go to less photometry or something else that will allow you to do ensemble work. There are some questions here that have more to do with calibration and things like that, which I think are kind of beyond our purview. But I would encourage anyone who wants to learn. We have 2 wonderful CCD courses. I will teach one, and my colleague Phil will teach the other one in the fall, and you're all invited to sign up. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave you all. I've got research calls. I must get out to my wonderful observatory in the beautiful Texas Hill Country.
Thank you, Ed, so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Ed. Thank you.
Just a note.
Thank you for the pleasure of giving part of a talk. And Ken, thank you for being a good collaborator.
Great. Thanks, Ed.
In the chat, In the chat, I actually put a link to the CCD camera photometry guide, and the particular chapter for transformations is chapter 6. So,
I had
Ken,
two questions. Greg, I
you
had
had questions. Go right ahead.
the first one is from Eric Dose. Yes, Eric, I hear your question. And he's posted the same question in the forum at one point. He said, you don't transform to a filter, you transform to a standard passband. Yes, I accept that, Ed. And the only issue is in my mind, I can't separate the two. They sort of mean the same thing to me. But yes, I understand there's a difference. Craig Babbage asked, what about air mass? Does it factor into transforming? The overall answer is yes and no. In terms of the transformation coefficient, let me stop and take a step back. In a large field of view, let's say more than a degree, you do need to also not just correct for your different filter characteristics, but also for the difference in air mass from one side of your image to another. But frankly, and again, Gordon Myers and I had the paper, maybe we'll try to post it again, in England, where we discussed both transformation and extinction correction, if you will. And it's really only when you, especially unfortunately, when you get to DSLR cameras again, especially if you're just using a lens as opposed to a telescope, that the air mass can be quite significant from one side of the filter. You may have a 10-degree field of view, literally. And in that case, yes, there are corrections for air mass. They're part of the transformation equations. Take a look at that for example, I always recommend looking at the DSLR manual, and Barbara Harris can help in that regard if you have any questions about it. But look there as well, because it does a good job of addressing transformation and extinction correction as well.
All right. So I'm just going to continue going down the list. I apologize. I'm not able to think about which questions I want to answer and do this hosting at the same time. So Jane Miller says, I had bought a Sloan G filter, but the AAVSO doesn't use Sloan, but uses Johnson colors. How can I find Sloan comparison stars?
Let's see. I'll give you the non-politic answer, and I'll get myself in trouble. If you look at the tool SeqPlot on the AAVSO website, yes, I understand the sequence team is cursing at me right now. You can, in fact, obtain the Sloan magnitudes G, R, and I from that database, and you can manually enter those into your sequence in VFOT, for example, or whatever other tool you're using for magnitudes. So you can go there to get those. You can go to Vizier Simbad, because the APAS data, at least an older version 9, I believe, is available on that resource as well. So yes, you can get them. Keep the faith, as I mentioned earlier. At some point in the future, there will be Sloan magnitudes available in the comp database.
Yes, we are evolving. I would like to add to what Ken just said. APAS DR10 is out actually, and it has Sloan comparison stars. So right now, the state of the art, as far as I know, is APAS. So please use those comparison stars until we find a way of incorporating them to the rest of our infrastructure. So
one of the things I've done in my professional role is, even in non-photometric nights, I've used ensemble of SDSS by literally matching all the stars to the Sloan Digital Sky survey. And then in the past, I wasn't so concerned about variable stars, so figuring that some variable stars would go high, some would go low, and it wouldn't matter. But you could do a next steps thing, and you could basically take SDSS stars, compare them to the VSX database, and remove everything with a VSX match, and you could create a pseudo standard field of SDSS everywhere, anywhere you want. Obviously, that requires some development of tools if you don't already have that in your capacity, but I've done that personally. Long ago, I've done a version of that without the VSX correction, and it could be something that would be an interesting way of doing things going forward. In many ways, there's a part of me that wonders whether this is how we will actually do a lot of our calibration going forward in a lot of professional astronomy as well. Because we have issues in terms of, as we go deeper and deeper and deeper, the standard stars will start to become too bright for some of the telescopes that get used. So George Contouris, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name, by the way, asked, what accuracy do we need about exoplanet transit photometry? So you may have answered this. I didn't recall if you talked specifically about the needed accuracy when you responded to Dennis.
Yeah, I didn't actually. And the answer is a bit open-ended. For transits that are very deep, a few tenths of a percent, for example, or a few hundredths of a percent, you can, in fact, do that relatively easily with less than stellar precision. The real issue becomes many of the test objects that some of us are working on have transits that approach a part per thousand, a millimag. And in fact, from the Earth, we're out of luck. We can't do that. That's why we depend on TESS and other satellites up there in space to do that type of analysis for us. So again, you do your best. Actually, you limit yourself to things that are realistic. Don't expect, if you normally get 1/100th of a magnitude precision or random error, that you can do something with a transit of only a few parts per million or a few millimag. It's just not possible. So it's really a matter of selecting objects and conditions that you can observe well and accurately.
So thank you. Leslie Brown points out that all digital cameras have a wavelength-dependent quantum efficiency, QE. Actually, every single detector, almost every single detector in the world that I know of has a wavelength-dependent QE at some level. As a matter of fact, in some ways, this is part of what goes into your own transformations. It's not just your filter transformation, it's your detector transformation as well.
Right.
So let's see. Brad points out his comment, so there's two things. His comment about transforming, and I've lost the second comment, was Brad was being cute about the word transformation. What he really wants to know is how CCD users will learn how to use CMOS cameras to do their photometry. I've only used CMOS for planetary imaging. So I talked a little bit about CMOS yesterday, and so I'll try to take this one. Nike, just do it. Actually go out, and if matter of fact, if you, depending on your setup, some people could have multiple cameras, but some people can switch out cameras night to night. Go out, measure the same field with CMOS, measure the same field with your CCD camera. Depending on your CMOS camera, you might find that you can do absolutely wonderful. You might have gotten a CMOS camera towards the more affordable end, which is designed for planetary imaging, and it won't be as good as the scientific CMOS cameras that were $6,000 to $8,000 that I was touting yesterday. There's always a range of what you can do.
And Brad, to a certain extent, I think the question is already answered. Many members are using their CMOS cameras now and reporting data. As you observed, we were using the BSM camera in New Hampshire for one part of our analysis, and that's a CMOS camera. There are people in the Southern Hemisphere and the Northern Hemisphere, a significant number of members who are talking about this same issue on the AAVSO forums. Hopefully, at least in my mind, there will be a CMOS guide of some sort in the hopefully not too distant future. At the outside, I'll say a year, but it's available now. I think the best practice is what we use in New Hampshire on the BSM systems, is to use zero gain. So you maximize the dynamic range and use normal programs to do your photometry. And you will get, as you observed with our Landolt standard study, accurate and precise results. I think the question has been answered in that sense.
I'll also note that although there are differences from CMOS and CCD cameras when you get into the very level of details, they're not hugely different. They're really just a different strategy of, do you do your analysis for every pixel of your camera, or do you do your analysis after you read out the camera with one set of electronics. And of course, there are hybrids, because most CCD chips these days don't just have one readout buffer, one readout amplifier. But I think realistically, we've gotten very attached to this idea that there's a difference between CMOS and CCDs, and the filling factors have gotten so good. All the things that were problematic for astronomy 20 years ago with CMOS cameras, it's just not the case nowadays.
And there are a few wrinkles, like the CCD camera's been on the chip, and the CMOS cameras do it outside in software. But you get a similar result.
Yeah, I'm a person who always likes software solutions, because I don't have to buy new hardware to do a new solution. So Gordon Meyer says, one could think of transformation as a way to calibrate your system to standard values, just as one calibrates any type of measurement equipment. So we've been talking about transformation a bunch because it was so central to what Ken and Ed presented. So I don't think there's a comment that needs to be made there unless you have one, Ken.
Well, only again that Gordon is effectively referring to the paper that he and I gave in England 3 years ago. Yes, you can in fact calibrate your system to give you perfect agreement with the known magnitude by making this correction. Try to find that paper online. Maybe Gordon and I will try to post it again.
Thierry Midavain says, you spoke about cousins and Sloan filters. Do you think we have to now move to the GG, GBP, and GRP filters of the Gaia mission, which is now available in the DR2 catalogs and with a DR3 catalog soon? These three broadbands are well fitted to silicon focal plane array, ?
I think I'll give you a quick answer whether it's valid or not. No. In fact, some of those, the test, for example, has a very wide bandpass. And I think for a lot of astrophysical reasons, it's nice to have some more discrete and smaller bandpasses to do your comparisons in color ranges.
So Sloan, in my mind, Sloan did create a revolution in terms of what filters to use. I think that was twofold. One, it was different filter technologies and different combinations of wavelengths that subtly affected very specific systems that originally James Gunn pointed out long ago, which the Sloan is built off of. But also, it was because it was the first of these widespread optical, digitally available surveys, which basically mean very many people adopted it. I don't think that just because Gaia or TESS or some other mission has to go, because they choose to go to wider band passes for their science, that means we're going to have to adapt. As a matter of fact, what most of the people do when they're actually trying to design missions is they're trying to also do the same thing. They know that a lot of data is getting done in Sloan filters. So these days, people don't want to get too far out the Sloan filters. So I think astronomy will not be changing filter sets every 10 years. But you do want to think about every 20 years may not be unreasonable to some extent.
I had one question from Scott O'Donnell here that's interesting. Generally, you're at the mercy of whatever number of comps are available in the image field of view. Yes, that's always true. We have to live with that. Often when he does two-color transformation, he finds that the estimates for some of his comps deviate from the truth significantly, forcing me to exclude them from consideration. I think what you're saying is, Scott, that occasionally you may get divergences, systematic errors of a few tenths of a magnitude. My hope is that generally is not the case after transformation. Does it mean there's some underlying inaccuracy bias in that quote, true magnitude? The answer may be yes. Is there something wrong with your image? Is there a cloud passing through that portion of the sky? Did you have a big dust mote there that your flat didn't take out? I think hopefully the answer would be it shouldn't happen that often. I typically, whenever I do my analysis, I look at my check star to see how divergent that is from the known magnitude. And I use that as my reference point. And occasionally, hopefully you'll get a few tenths. I typically have a random noise of 0.03 magnitudes, to be honest with you, in most of my analysis. I'm in 20 miles west of Boston with relatively poor skies. It's amazing still what you can do with a CCD camera. So again, you do your best. Yes, if it looks like ideally there's a reason to exclude a comp, like you look at the image and it just, it's overlapping another star or something like that, then there's clearly a reason for excluding that. Try not to do that unilaterally if you can. Try to keep them as best you can. But we're all fraught with that same problem. We see a really divergent number. We really don't know why, but we say, it's too bad. So I take it out. And it's just something we live in, but try not to do it all the time.
Thinking in terms of keeping things consistent in data, one of the things I don't understand, because I'm not thinking about this as much, but oftentimes we'll see the comment listed ensemble for the comparison stars. And while an ensemble is better than a single comp star in many cases, a known ensemble is even better. Because if possible, it is possible if all of a sudden in a known ensemble, we realize that one star was crazy, there are ways in which future people could back out corrections. So I don't know, because I don't submit the data, how one would best deal with this for AAVSO and whether we have that capacity, but it's just something to think about if that's not already in our capacity for something down the line.
In one little comment and aside, unfortunately, we don't have it in VFOT yet, but again, Pierre's lab photometry has the ability to weight your comp stars so that the fainter comp stars are given less weight to the final average than the brighter comps. So that's a neat little capability. So take a look at his program.
Do you just want to? I'll just go down the list. So Richard Wagner points out, he corrects me, thank you so much, Richard, that the T in TG, TR, TB, etc. refers to tricolor filters, i.e. one-shot color or DSLRs that are pretty picture filters and does not refer to transformed. Thank you so much. I made a wild A guess and guessed wrong. Stephen Futcher asked, can the transformation coefficients vary for different camera telescope combinations? I think we've answered that yes. Not only can they vary, but they are likely to vary for different camera telescope combinations if there are, and might possibly even for the same camera, same telescope across different people owning the same camera and telescope.
One of the things we do on the BSM systems is when we change a camera, even in the case where one of the ST8s died and the operator of that telescope put his own camera on it. And we even did a different set of coefficients for that. Frankly, they're not generally that divergent. If you're using the same set of filters, they're relatively close, perhaps not within experimental error, but not too far away.
You have to excuse me, I am a precision, accuracy, and statistics wonkish,
nudge, yep.
Anal retentive, you know what. So I sometimes go that way. Eric Dose points out that you can't get same color comps for very red variables because the comparison stars will themselves be variables and not standards. And that's a good point. There will be some point, you will sometimes be backed into a corner by the physics of the universe. So when I said for redder or bluer stars, if there are standards out there that you can pick, that's great. I think that the ensemble method, even a color ensemble can be done if you have a large enough ensemble. And the idea is that you're hoping that the statistical variation of one going up and one going down will, on average, vary out in that ensemble. So you can even use non-standards in ensembles, in my opinion. All right, Mark Sorrell asked, where do I find Landau fields with standards you used? So is there a great resource that people have for the Landau? I used to have a resource 15 years ago on the web, but that bookmark may not be up to date. Mark, I think neither Ken nor I has it. If someone has it and they can put it in the chat, that's great. I'm going to leave your question up as we haven't answered it in case it does get answered while we go through the remaining 11 other questions.
Greg, was the question where to get those magnitudes?
Where to find them, yes. Where to find the fields. It says land out fields with standards. So there's two aspects. There's where do you find the fields? And then once you find the fields, where do you find the magnitudes?
Okay. Implicitly, what Ed and I did was to start with the standard fields that are provided by the AAVSO that George Silva's put together. So that will allow you to give a link to that standard field. And if you click on that link, you can get the photometry for each of those stars in the field. So I think that's the short answer to where you would go. So go to the search term standard field in the AAVSO search box. It's probably the first link that's shown when you do that. You'll go to the list of standard fields. When you click on one of them, for example, SA38, you can both get a chart of those, and you can click on the photometry tab and get the photometry for each of those stars, showing the Landolt magnitudes. That's in fact what Ed and I did for this study. So I think that answers that specifically, if you can find it. You're trying to find it.
I'm putting this information in the chat window as we speak.
Yep.
I think that's more than enough for that.
Yep, Ken, there was one question. Nope, I think it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Leslie Brown said, can you use transfer multiplier on a CSV file containing mags, errors, and timestamps, or some other instrumental mag data file format, not VFLAT format? Let's see. I'll have to think about that. Excuse me. I'll think about that, and you go to the next question, Ed, if you,
Sure.
Greg, if you think.
So Cameron McEwen thanked Ken and Ed for the really insightful presentation, and I will echo that thanks. Mike Miller asks, what are the most important procedure steps in creating good flats? What are some pitfalls to avoid, say, in taking sky flats? And I'm guessing that that's perfectly presented in the CCD manual that we linked to.
Mike, I take my flats with the sky as opposed to a panel. People have talked about all of those being good or bad or indifferent. I think the key is to take them every day. One of the things I learned from the CCD school that I already put on a few years ago was not just to take your flats once a week or once a month, to take them regularly and perhaps make a running average. That's what we do on the BSM systems, on the AAVSO net systems. So regularly update your flats, and they should be relatively adequate to use.
So it is chapter 4 of the CCD manual, which discusses flat fields a little bit. So I posted that link.
Yep, good.
So Mark Munkaxi, I apologize, I may have mispronounced that poorly, or pronounced that poorly, says the standard fields M67 and NGC 7790 are both relatively crowded fields. When is it appropriate to shift from aperture photometry to PSF profile fitting? So I will take I'll take a stab at this, and I will say that do the analysis that you can do. And as long as you're telling people what the analysis you're doing, I wouldn't worry about that too much. When I am doing analysis, I almost always eventually go to a PSF profile fitting, because remember, I care about the ultra high level precision stuff. And it also may matter if you have very wide field of views where you have a positionally dependent PSF. But to first order, even in some crowded fields, I found you could do in the past fairly well with just aperture photometry.
I agree. I think in fact many professionals use just simple differential photometry with apertures for most of their things. The one question that I was thinking about that Leslie Brown asked about CSV files in Transform Multiplier, now that I thought about it for a minute, Transform Multiplier wants the AAVSO text report format. So the quick answer is no, it doesn't. There are probably some awkward ways of changing that, but download your file as an AAVSO text file report.
So one thing you could imagine asking is whether at some point AAVSO code or parts of AAVSO code might go online to something like GitHub in the future, not anywhere close. But at that time, you can imagine someone forking the analysis aspects to do something like a CSV. So for those of you who are not computer geeks, GitHub is a way of sharing code. And the idea of forking a code is, imagine you come to a path, two of you have traveled together, and you want to take a slightly different path. So that's a fork in the road. We use the same terminology in computing.
Right. So most of the AAVSO code actually is on GitHub. So we are
there you go.
Big proponents of open source. So you can find a lot of our code there.
I apologize. I did not know that. As a former board member, I should have known that.
That's why I'm here.
Sure.
Right. Keep going, guys. This is very interesting.
I have one question. Cameron McEwing asked the question related to transforming LRGB filters, pretty picture filters, to BVRI, effectively asking which should he sacrifice more, precision or accuracy? Cameron, as you know from the choice course that we just finished, I'm a strong proponent of accuracy versus precision. I'll stick with that. There are some circumstances, especially if you're interested in temporal variation, where precision is probably a little more important, but I'll leave it at that. It's a choice that you make and a compromise that you make.
Yeah, I will say that it comes down to the scientific question that the person is going to use the data for. And that's not something that you can necessarily answer ahead of time, but the type of data you're taking may inform that. So for instance, when I'm looking at SSSIG, the prototypical dwarf accreting white dwarf that goes into explosions about once a month, when I look at that source, I often don't care about the short time variations. And so in that case, I often will be averaging data from different observers. So in that case, I care more that you are accurate and you're precise, because I'm going to get more precision by averaging more and more data. It's better, like, if you could be both accurate and precise, and God, I wish there was a single word to discuss that combination. Prosacracy, I don't know. But if you can do that, that's great. But if you can't, I would go with accuracy unless we know that there is, for instance, that all you care about is a relative photometry. If all you care about is a relative photometry, as long as your accuracy is not time dependent, then go for precision in that case. So it's what Ken said, just I guess from my perspective of how I approach it in my professional life.
Heinz Burned asked the question about the CMOS guide. The bottom line is, should it be an addendum or an addition to the CCD guide as it exists now, or should it be a separate guide? And Heinz Burned, I don't know if you're still there since you're in Germany. The quick answer is there are two opposing views about that specific guide. I'm on one side, making it a separate manual. A few other people are on the other side of making it one manual with just an addition. I think it should be just a freestanding one, but it really doesn't matter as long as we get the information on it and it's usable.
So Heinz is still here, by the way.
Okay,
I just checked the
good.
participants.
Yep.
I would say that in an issue with this, where you have two different camps, there's a simple solution. The answer is yes. You have chapter 6A and chapter 6B, or whatever it be. Sorry, chapter 4A and chapter 4B, or whatever. Or sorry. You basically make one version that's both and one version that's separate. It's a little bit more work unless you're intelligent on how you do it, and that can be done with LaTeX in a very intelligent way. So it's actually no more work. It just requires a little bit of planning.
We'll have to get a few pointers from you then.
So Natalie Vernina asks, should I apply any kind of correction if I process a long time series when air mass changes?
The real key is not that the air mass has changed, but what the air mass difference is across your images. You're doing differential photometry. So as long as they're close to each other, they're all at the same air mass. At the same air mass at the zenith
or at the same air mass at the horizon. Now, when you get really close to the horizon or less than 30 degrees, things start to fall apart there a little, because then even the difference in air mass across the field of view may start to become significant. But generally, in my mind, it's a non-issue because we're doing differential phenometry. You agree, Greg?
I do agree. I have to think very so there's a follow the directions part of me, which says that an air mass correction, if you have your fixed headers done properly, and if you're automating your analysis through whatever programs or something, automatically should be done anyway.
All the time, yes.
And so there's a part of me that goes, the answer is should you apply that correction? Yes, because I think that you should always apply an air mass correction. However, Ken is absolutely correct that for the purpose of when you're doing when you're doing a differential photometry, which is what we always do, it's not as critical. I just like to, I train my students to always do things as much with the directions as possible, as long as it doesn't take them too long to code it up or to actually do the analysis. And the air mass correction analysis is super simple and done in every program that I know of.
And in fact, unfortunately, it's not done regularly in most amateur software photometry. So that's the problem. And in fact, as I'm sure most of you will agree, only about 90% of the data submitted to the AAVSO is currently even transformed, let alone extinction correction. So we have a long way to go, and I would recommend that we start with transformation before we worry about extinction coefficient correction.
I agree. So Cameron had an answer. I'm not sure which question it was to, because I've been deleting them. I apologize. I think it was to the last question. So Sebastian Otoro points out that seqplot doesn't actually list slow magnitudes either. Magnitudes are transformed to BV, cousins R, and cousin I. So thank you, Sebastian.
Yep, I stand corrected, Sebastian. Yes, that's true. If you go to, okay, so done, yes. In the case of the standard fields we did, you are able to get to those standard slow magnitudes.
So Sebastian points out also for Thierry that the G, BP, and RP magnitudes in guided DR3 will be different from those in DR2. So generally, for a variety of reasons, as data releases come out, these things do in fact change. And that's one of the nice things when you do something like APAS or something else, and when you do a data release, people will often do analysis to a certain data release, and they'll stick with that for as long as they're doing the analysis as long as possible, because they don't want to have to deal with the fact that in the year they did their analysis, APAS came out with a new data release. And so this is common in, or at least in professional astronomy, that you just basically are very clear as to what data release data you do if you're doing any type of calibration stuff. Ray Tallman asks, when you see the comparisons in ensemble varying on VPHOT, how can you tell which one or two comparison stars are varying? So I think this might have been a comment to my question. So I mentioned that there are ways in which you could potentially do an analysis after the fact if you know which stars are in an ensemble are variable. You might be able to remove the technique. I think I slightly bespoke. What I would actually do is, based on the ensemble, since you're absolutely correct that you can't know for sure how one is varying, what to me is very important to do is to actually account for that in your quoted precision. And so you could go after the fact and do that after the fact and say, there's a star that's varying in here, and so I'm going to add a little bit to my precision of how well I think I've done the transform.
Actually, Ray, I'm not sure I agree with your comment. In fact, you can look at the individual standard deviation of the individual comps, and a comp that doesn't vary very much will have a very small standard deviation, and the ones that do vary somewhat will have a larger standard deviation. Also, there's a graph of comps in VPHOT where you can actually see them plotted out. Granted, you need to blow it up. It's hard to see unless it's a really big change. Also, if you're doing an ensemble, you'll see, at least in one of the modes, you'll see the target estimate for each of the individual comps. And they'll be graded in different color redness. So you can see which ones are the most divergent in terms of their target estimate. And you attribute that to their individual comp magnitude being the furthest away. So I think talk to me, Ed, offline by email. You know my address, and we can pursue that. But I think, in fact, you can do what you want to do.
So yeah, so I misinterpreted the question in terms of I was thinking if someone didn't have the information fully in there and they just said I did an ensemble on this. You're saying that Ray may be asking of, as I'm doing the ensemble, how can you tell stuff? And I agree. I completely agree that you can definitely, and the way I do the way I look at these things is a variety of techniques looking for outliers. And you know, I teach courses on data analysis, so it's not a simple answer that I can compress down into a pithy 1-minute sentence. So we have many people. Thank you so much for all putting in the standard fields in the Q&A to comment to complement what I'm doing in terms of the chat. So thank you so much. From Mark Sorrell, we have thanks to Ken and myself. Bert points out that AAVSO code is often on Git code. However, it is typically a private repository because there are multiple tools which relate to internal databases and passwords, etc. For codes that are not online tools, we try to make them available. So this gets into the different ways you keep track of your codes and how you deal with positive and how you deal with security issues, etc. in your repositories. So Bert's absolutely correct. We will never be putting out data on purpose and hopefully never, or code on purpose and hopefully never accidentally that makes our site less secure. But hopefully the routines, the mathematical stuff, that type of thing, that could be hopefully part of any public GitHub if it isn't currently already.
Arnie has a good comment here that I just noted. Don't forget second order extinction. In fact, that's the one that depends most significantly on the color of the two stars you're working with. And in fact, even if your field of view is relatively small, as you do traverse in a time series over a large change in air mass, it does become significant. In fact, for the B filter specifically, it can approach hundredths to a tenth of the magnitude. So even when the first order extinction is not important, that second order extinction can be important, especially if you're looking at very blue or very red stars. So keep that in mind.
So thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I've gotten 4 hours of sleep for the last 3 weeks per night, so I'm a little tired. I misspoke. Heinz Bert pointed out that what we talked about, he was just worried about duplication. At this point, I can't even remember which comment Heinz gave us. I know I have to look back at what we answered. We talked about the CMOS guides. So yes, there's an issue about duplication. I would say my argument is that
who cares?
But my argument that as long as there's no duplication of work, I don't mind duplication.
I think the bottom line is we want a CMOS manual of some sort.
Yes. And I have to point out before we add with the last two questions, because we went so long, we were unable to thank Lindsay for her organizing today. And I really feel remiss about that. So I apologize that we didn't actually do that. So Stella, if you could please let her know that we are so sorry we didn't get a chance to publicly thank her, but we do thank her now. That's important.
And I'd like to remind people that hopefully there is a post survey available. Is the link obvious somewhere, Stella, do you know, or?
Individuals who have registered will receive it.
Okay, and if you can respond, that would be helpful for future how-to hours.
Yes.
So Stella, I know we have to wrap up. We have 2 last questions. Can we finish it off at the top? We'll say top of the hour we're done.
Got 5 more minutes, yeah.
Let's do it.
So Gordon Myers points out that APAS data downloads, so Johnson B&V, Sloan UGRIZ if available. That was nice and good. Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah, it,
Um,
it can be found.
Yes. Richard Wagner asks, can I depend on my transformation coefficients being identical for unbinned and 2x2 binned images?
I guess I'll punt by honestly, Richard, not knowing exactly what it is. Arnie might know. I'm sure he knows. I would have just done it both ways just to make sure and see what happens. I'm a very experimentally oriented guy. I don't depend on what somebody else tells me. I tell this to the people in the choice course, do it yourself. It's not that hard to do. If you know how to do it in 1x1 binning to do your flats, you know how to do it in 2x2. Look at the results, see how much they differ. I think that's the best answer.
My suspicion is that it will matter more for CMOS chips, I think, than it might for CCD chips. And this is because the CMOS chips have individual electronics for every pixel. And so variation pixel to pixel might be a little bit more extreme, although that comment is based on last generation CMOSs, not necessarily the scientific CMOS generation of detectors that are out there nowadays. So I don't want to be disparaging the CMOS. That's just my intuition, as that there may be a relative difference between the two. But otherwise, the transformation is probably to first order, I think, affected most by your filter, and then to second order by your detector. But I may be incorrect there. And Arnie, if you wanted to quickly pipe up in case we're wrong there, let us know. Farhat says this was a great talk. Thank you all. And that leaves us with Leslie Brown's question on the CSV file. Do we feel we've answered that to significant depth?
I answer that. You need the AAVSO report text file.
There we go. Well, folks, thank you so much.
And with that, I think we concluded another how-to hour. Thank you to all of you who stayed with us during the Q&A marathon. Thank you to Ken and Greg who stick with that, and Ed Wiley who left us earlier to go to his observatory, actually, to keep his observations. I hope to see you all tomorrow during day 3 of our AAVSO annual meeting, the science sessions, and also the parallel sessions for our observing sections. And with that, I will thank you again. You gave us a lot of food for thought. Also, when it comes to future ideas for how to, please fill the survey. That is what is helping us move forward with future events such as this one. I will wish you good evening or good morning, your day starting right now. And please be safe.
Stella, real quick, Joyce has a very important question for you. Can you please archive this Q&A?
Sure. We're going to look into our Zoom files.
Okay.
All right.
And thank you all for the thanks.
Take good care, everyone.
Folks, thank you.
Be safe. Bye. Good night.